My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye across my own son's casket and said, "You won't see a dime of Mitchell's money, old man. Not one red cent." Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing that line for months. But 3 weeks later, when the lawyer opened that envelope in his office on Bay Street, the color drained from her face so fast, I thought she'd collapse right there on the carpet. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. The kind of morning where the leaves along the Ottawa River had turned that deep copper color that makes you feel like the whole world is on fire. I was out back splitting firewood for the season, the axe biting into birch with a rhythm I'd kept for 40 years. My phone was inside on the kitchen counter. I didn't hear it the first 3 times. When I finally came in for coffee, the screen showed 4 missed calls from a Toronto number I didn't recognize. I was wiping sawdust off my hands when it rang again. "Mr. Brousseau? This is Dr. Anwar at Toronto General. I'm calling about your son, Mitchell." Something in her voice made my knees go soft. I grabbed the edge of the counter. "Mitchell was brought in by ambulance early this morning. I'm very sorry to tell you he suffered a massive stroke. The medical team worked on him for over an hour, but we weren't able to save him." The kitchen went sideways. I sat down hard on the floor, my back against the cupboards, still holding the phone. The coffee maker was gurgling behind me, filling the room with that ordinary morning smell while my whole life fell apart. "Sir, are you still there?" "I'm here." My voice came out like it belonged to someone else. "How?" "He was 44. He ran marathons. Sometimes these things happen without warning. I'm deeply sorry." After I hung up, I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. The coffee maker beeped. A blue jay screamed outside the window. The furnace kicked on. The world kept turning like nothing had happened, and I hated it for that. On the fridge, held up by a magnet Mitchell had brought me from Banff when he was 12, was a photo of the 2 of us ice fishing on Loch Day Shots. He must have been 9 in that picture, bundled up in the snowsuit 2 sizes too big, holding a wally nearly as long as his arm. His grin could have melted the ice we were standing on. I tried calling Jolene, straight to voicemail, that artificial voice she used, clipped and professional, like she was running a corporation instead of a family. I left a message, called again 20 minutes later. Then again. By the 5th attempt, my hands were shaking and I wasn't sure if it was grief or anger. "Jolene, it's Réjean. I've been trying to reach you all morning. We need to talk about Mitchell. Please call me." She never called back. I sat in my workshop that evening, surrounded by half-finished cabinets and the smell of cedar shavings. 42 years I'd run this carpentry shop, building kitchens and bookshelves and hope chests for families in the Ottawa Valley. My hands knew wood the way Mitchell's had known numbers. He'd gone from this little house in Arnprior to a penthouse in Yorkville, and somewhere along the way, the distance between us had grown wider than the Ottawa River. My neighbor Gus found me the next morning loading my truck in the dark. "Réjean, where are you going at this hour?" "Toronto." "Mitchell's gone." Gus didn't ask questions. He just gripped my shoulder, and I could feel 40 years of friendship in that grip. "You call me if you need anything. I mean it." The drive was 5 hours of highway I barely saw. The 417th east to the 7, then south on the 400 series toward the city. 5 hours of memories coming at me like oncoming headlights. Mitchell at 6 helping me sand a rocking chair in the shop, his little hands moving the sandpaper in careful circles the way I'd shown him. "Is it smooth enough, Dad?" Running his palm across the wood with such seriousness. Mitchell at 18, accepted to Queen's on a full scholarship. His mother, Colette, had cried at the kitchen table. She was already sick by then, though we didn't know it yet. The cancer took her 14 months later, and Mitchell had driven home every single weekend to sit with her. Every single one. Mitchell at 30, calling me from Bay Street to say he'd just closed a deal worth $8 million. His voice electric, the same way it used to get when he'd score a goal in minor hockey. "Dad, you should see this office." I can see the CN Tower from my desk. I'd been proud. Maybe too proud to say it enough. Toronto swallowed my truck whole. The 401 squeezed me between towers of glass and steel, and my old F-150 felt like a canoe on open water. Mitchell's neighborhood was another planet from Arnprior. Streets lined with limestone townhouses and German cars that cost more than my shop made in a year. Trees trimmed into shapes that didn't occur in nature. Everything manicured, controlled, expensive. I found the address and parked across the street from a 3-story Victorian that Mitchell had bought 2 years ago. Through the iron fence, I could see a front garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. This was what my son had built. This was the life he'd chosen over Sunday dinners and ice fishing on the lake. I rang the bell, waited, rang again. The door opened, and there was Jolene. She looked like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Black cashmere sweater, perfect makeup, not a hair moved. For a woman who'd just lost her husband, she looked remarkably put together. She looked me over the way you'd inspect something the cat dragged in. "You should have called first," she said. I called 5 times. You didn't answer. She stepped aside just enough to let me through, like she was already regretting the decision. The house inside was all white walls and modern furniture, the kind of place where everything looks expensive and nothing looks comfortable. My work boots left faint marks on the hardwood, and I saw her notice. "I've already made the arrangements," she said, leading me into a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden I could have fit my entire property inside. The funeral home, the flowers, the program, it's all handled. What about the burial? Mitchell never told me. He'll be cremated. It's cleaner. She said it the way you discussed taking out the recycling. There's really nothing for you to do here, Rajon. She sat down on a white sofa that probably cost more than my truck, crossing her legs with the precision of someone who'd practiced the pose. I remained standing, feeling every crease in my flannel shirt. "When's the service?" "Saturday. Small, private, close friends only." The message landed exactly where she aimed it. "Jolene, I drove 5 hours. He was my son." Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth. More like the calculation that I might cause a scene if she pushed too hard. "Fine. Saturday at 1 o'clock. St. Mine. James Cathedral on King Street. But don't make this difficult." I nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she stopped me. "Rajon. Mitchell left quite a substantial estate. I'll be managing all of it naturally. There's a great deal to sort out." The way she said it wasn't information. There was a fence post, marking where her territory began and mine ended. I found a motel on Kingston Road, the kind of place with a blinking sign and a parking lot that had seen better decades. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I sat on the bed and pulled out my wallet, 2 photos. Colette on our wedding day, standing outside the church in Arnprior with autumn leaves swirling around her dress. Next to it, Mitchell at his own wedding 3 years ago. Jolene beside him in a gown that probably cost what I'd charge for 6 months of cabinet work. That wedding, I should have seen it coming. It was at some estate in Prince Edward County, white tents on perfect grass, a guest list full of people whose names appeared in the Globe and Mail. I'd worn my one good suit, the same dark blue I'd worn to Colette's funeral, and felt every thread of it among the tailored crowd. "Your father's charming," I'd overheard one of Jolene's friends whisper during the reception. In a rustic sort of way, Jolene had laughed. Different worlds entirely. Mitchell's sentimental about where he came from. He'll grow out of it. Grow out of it. Like his childhood, his mother's memory, his old man, all of it was a phase to be outgrown. My phone buzzed. "Gus, how are you holding up?" "She's already talking about his money, Gus. He's not even in the ground yet. That woman never deserved your boy. The worst part? Last couple years, Mitchell sounded different on the phone. Quieter. Like he was carrying something he couldn't put down. You think she was the weight?" "I think she was a lot of things." I lay in the dark listening to traffic on the Gardner. 5 hours from Arnprior, and I might as well have been on another continent. In a few days I'd have to sit in a church and pretend Jolene and I were family, instead of strangers connected by a man we'd both lost and maybe never fully known. Colette would have handled this better. She'd had a way of disarming people with kindness that was so genuine it shamed them into behaving. But Colette was gone, and Mitchell was gone, and I was alone in a motel room that charged by the hour, trying to figure out how to bury my son, while his wife treated me like an inconvenience. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the way October can turn in Toronto without warning. St. James Cathedral rose above King Street like a stone ship, and I stood at the bottom of the steps in a suit I'd bought at a value village on Queen East, trying to make myself presentable. Inside, the air was heavy with lilies. Jolene held court near the entrance, surrounded by women in designer black, and men who looked like they'd been carved from Bay Street granite. She'd turned grief into a networking event. Air kisses and murmured condolences passed like currency. I signed the guest book and took a seat in the back pew. From there, I could watch without being part of the performance. Such a loss, a woman in pearls was telling Jolene. And so young. Jolene pressed a tissue to the corner of her eye, careful not to smudge anything. He pushed himself so hard, his heart just couldn't keep up with his ambition. A man in a charcoal suit leaned in. Jolene, if you need any help managing the portfolio, the properties, you're so kind, Alistair. I'll be handling everything personally, of course. Of course. Everything personally, of course. Of course. Everything personally. Like Mitchell's life was an acquisition she'd completed. Then her voice dropped, and I heard it carry just enough to reach the pews behind her. See that old man in the back? Mitchell was embarrassed by him. Barely finished high school, builds cupboards for a living. The woman beside her glanced my way with a look caught between pity and curiosity. Jolene, surely he's grieving too. He barely visited. Now he wants to play the devoted father. My hands tightened on the wooden pew until my knuckles went white. Whatever distance had grown between Mitchell and me, he'd never been ashamed of where he came from. He'd kept that photo of us ice fishing on his office wall. His secretary had told me so, the one time I'd visited Bay Street. I stood up. The pew creaked in the cathedral silence. Conversation stopped as I walked toward Jolene's circle. This is a funeral, I said quietly, not a cocktail party. Let's give my son the respect he earned. Her face rearranged itself into wounded dignity so fast it was almost impressive. Of course, Réjean, we're all emotional today. The minister spoke about a man of vision and generosity, reading from notes Jolene had clearly provided. Hymns Mitchell would never have chosen, echoed off stone walls. The eulogy was polished, professional, and completely hollow. Not a word about ice fishing or hockey or the boy who used to help me sand rocking chairs. After the service, I stood alone with the closed casket and said the things I should have said when he could still hear them. That I was proud beyond measure. That I was sorry I hadn't fought harder to stay in his life. That his mother would have been amazed at what he'd built, even if the woman he'd married didn't deserve any of it. Outside, Jolene was already deep in conversation with a man who had lawyer written across every crease of his overcoat. Once the legal formalities are done, I'll need to move quickly on the commercial holdings. Something cold settled in my gut. She was too ready, too eager. Like she'd been rehearsing for this moment longer than she'd been grieving. 3 days later, I found myself in a conference room on the 38th floor of a Bay Street tower. Raymond Carruthers, Mitchell's attorney, had a corner office with a view that stretched to the lake. He was mid-60s. Wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of calm that comes from decades of watching families tear themselves apart over money. Jolene had arrived first, naturally. She sat at the head of the mahogany table like she was chairing a board meeting. Her posture perfect, a thin smile fixed in place. Beside her sat her friend Meredith, who served no legal purpose but was clearly there for moral support and witness. Irving, Mitchell's business partner, sat at the far end looking uncomfortable. Mitchell's university friend Donovan was there too, fidgeting with his watch. "Thank you all for coming," Raymond began. I understand this is a difficult time. Jolene smoothed her skirt. Réjean, you really don't need to stay for this. Don't expect a single penny from my husband's estate. It's $22 million, and it's coming to me. This is just a formality. 22 million, she said it the way you'd read a grocery receipt. I started the stand reaching for my cap on the table when something held me in place. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was Colette's voice in the back of my head telling me to stay. I'd like to hear Mitchell's wishes, I said. Raymond opened a leather folder and arranged several documents, each bearing notarial seals. The afternoon light caught the gold embossing. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. The last will and testament of Mitchell Réjean Brousseau, dated March the 8th, 2025. Jolene leaned forward. Her eyes were bright, hungry. Raymond read the preliminary legal language, then moved to the bequests. To my colleague and friend, Irving Park, I leave my share of the Kensington Market Development Project, valued at approximately $150,000. Irving nodded, murmuring thanks. To my friend, Donovan Flett, I leave my collection of vintage hockey memorabilia, valued at approximately $20,000. Standard small gifts. Jolene's smile widened with each one. Like every minor bequest confirmed that the real fortune was reserved for her alone. Raymond turned to the next page. I saw his posture shift, just barely. A breath held half a second too long. To my father, Réjean Brousseau, I leave the majority of my estate, including all business interests, investment portfolios, the property at 47 Hazelton Avenue, and all liquid assets held in trust, totaling approximately $21.4 million. The words landed like a tree falling across a silent road. Jolene's face went the color of old snow. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard, I could see tendons straining beneath her skin. "That's not possible," she whispered. Raymond continued, his voice steady as a metronome. To my wife, Jolene Brousseau, I leave the condominium at 610 Queen Street West, valued at approximately $780,000, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained within. Furthermore, Raymond said, pausing to adjust his glasses, Mitchell included a personal letter to be read aloud at this time. He unfolded a single handwritten page. Mitchell's handwriting. I recognized it from 20 years of birthday cards. Dad, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry I didn't say these things when I could. Every success I had started in your workshop. You taught me that quality matters more than speed, that your word is your bond, and that the measure of a man is how he treats people who can't do anything for him. I watched you build things with your hands that will outlast both of us, and I wanted my last act to reflect the values you gave me. Jolene, I hope the condo gives you a comfortable fresh start, but the life I built was built on my father's foundation, and that's where it belongs. Take care of each other. I love you both. The room was completely still. I couldn't see through my tears. My hands were trembling on the table. $21 million meant nothing next to those words in my boy's handwriting. Jolene broke first. This is fraud. She was on her feet, her chair slamming backward into the window. That senile old man manipulated my husband. Jolene, I didn't know about any of this. Lar. She pointed at me with a finger that shook with rage. You always resented me. You poisoned Mitchell against his own wife. Raymond stood, his professional composure showing its first crack. Mrs. Brousseau, this will was executed in compliance with all requirements under the Ontario Succession Law Reform Act. It was witnessed by 2 independent parties and notarized. I don't care. She swept a stack of documents off the table. Papers scattered across the carpet like dead leaves. I was his wife. I gave up everything for him. I moved to this frozen country for him. Mrs. Brousseau, if you wish to contest the will, that is your legal right. But I'd encourage you to consider carefully before contest it. Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm going to destroy it. No court in Ontario was going to believe Mitchell would choose his backwoods father over the woman who stood beside him. She grabbed her bag and turned for the door. At the threshold, she spun back one last time. "This isn't over. You'll hear from my lawyer by morning." The door slammed. The windows shuttered. Silence settled over the room like snow. Irving and Donovan made their exits quickly, mumbling condolences I barely heard. Then it was just Raymond and me. "Mr. Brousseau," he said quietly. "I should tell you, she's going to fight this." "I know." "She's retained Graham Whitfield. He's one of the most aggressive estate litigators in the province. This could get unpleasant." I looked down at my hands on that polished table. Carpenter's hands. Scarred, calloused, stained with 40 years of honest work. $21 million. The number didn't fit inside my understanding of the world. "Why did he do it, Raymond? We barely talked these last few years." Raymond removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "In my experience, Mr. Brousseau, the people who love us most are often the ones who find it hardest to say so while they're alive." The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of legal filings and sleepless nights. I stayed at the same motel on Kingston Road, its blinking sign becoming a strange kind of comfort. Gus drove down from Arnprior on the third day and didn't leave. Jolene's challenge landed exactly as Raymond predicted: undue influence. She claimed I'd manipulated Mitchell during a period of emotional vulnerability, that I'd guilted him into rewriting his will, that I'd exploited a son's misplaced sense of obligation to a father who'd never been there. The accusations burned because they carried just enough truth to sting. I hadn't visited enough. I'd let the distance between Arnprior and Toronto become an excuse. I'd been intimidated by Mitchell's world, the restaurants where the menus didn't have prices, the conversations about markets and portfolios that might as well have been in Mandarin. But manipulation? I'd barely seen my son twice a year. Raymond built our case the way I'd build a cabinet, methodically, with attention to joints and grain. Medical records confirmed Mitchell's perfect mental acuity right up to the stroke. The notary who'd witnessed the signing testified that Mitchell had been calm, deliberate, and entirely clear about his intentions. Phone records showed I'd called Mitchell less than once a month, hardly the pattern of a master manipulator. Whitfield's strategy was all theater. In depositions, he painted me as a bitter, small-town father who resented his son's success and schemed to redirect his wealth. He twisted every ordinary interaction into something sinister. A birthday card became emotional manipulation. A phone call about the Senators' game became a guilt trip. The court date arrived in late November, the kind of Toronto day where the wind off the lake cuts through everything. Ontario Superior Court, Osgoode Hall, with its limestone walls and the weight of 2 centuries of jurisprudence pressing down on everyone inside. Jolene arrived in a black town car, Whitfield beside her, both dressed like they were attending a premiere. I pulled into the parking garage in my F-150, Gus riding shotgun. Courtroom 4B smelled of old oak and floor wax. Justice Hargreaves, a man in his 70s with a face that suggested he'd heard every lie ever invented, took his seat without ceremony. Whitfield's opening was pure performance. "Your Honor, this case concerns an elderly man who exploited his dying son's guilt to redirect a fortune he never contributed to building." Raymond's response was 3 sentences. Mitchell Brousseau was of sound mind. He made a deliberate, witnessed, legally valid decision. The court should honor it. Jolene took the stand first. She was polished, prepared, every pause calculated for effect. Mitchell was consumed with guilt about his father. She testified, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my motel room. Rejon would call and Mitchell would be upset for days. He felt like he'd abandoned his roots. Whitfield guided her through a story that transformed a normal father-son relationship into psychological warfare. Every expression of love became coercion. Every silence became calculated pressure. When my turn came, I felt every eye measuring me. My hands trembled as I took the oath. "Mr. Brousseau," Raymond began, "how often did you see your son in the years before his death?" 3, maybe 4 times in the last 3 years. I'd come down for Thanksgiving when Jolene would allow it. Mitchell came home to Arnprar once 2 Christmases ago. We went ice fishing. It was a good day. Did you ever discuss his finances or his will? Never. I didn't know what he was worth until 3 weeks ago. I knew he'd done well, but 22 million, I build cabinets. That number doesn't mean anything real to me. Whitfield's cross-examination was designed to break me. He circled, probed, jabbed at every soft spot. Isn't it true you disapproved of your son's marriage? I worried about it. There's a difference. You thought Jolene married Mitchell for his money. I looked across the courtroom at Jolene, meeting her eyes directly. I thought she didn't love him the way he deserved to be loved. The last 3 weeks haven't changed my mind. The gallery stirred. Whitfield tried to redirect, but the damage was done. The notary testified next. Mr. Brousseau was completely lucid. He read every clause, asked me to clarify the residuary provisions, and specifically confirmed the allocation to his father. He told me, and I wrote this in my notes at the time, he said, "My father taught me everything that matters. This is my way of making sure he knows." Medical records. Business transactions. Phone logs showing sparse, ordinary contact between Mitchell and me. The evidence accumulated like snow, quiet, steady, impossible to argue with. By afternoon, Whitfield's case was thinning. His closing argument swung wildly between emotion and accusation. Don't let a manipulative father steal what rightfully belongs to the woman who shared Mitchell's life. Raymond stood slowly. Mitchell Brousseau made a choice. Every piece of evidence confirms he made it freely, competently, and deliberately. This court's only obligation is to honor that choice. Justice Hargreaves adjourned for the evening. I will deliver my ruling tomorrow at 10 a.m. That night, Gus and I sat in the motel parking lot on the tailgate of my truck, sharing a thermos of coffee in the cold. The Toronto skyline glittered in the distance like a circuit board. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Gus said, "your boy knew exactly what he was doing." I keep thinking about that letter. He wrote it by hand, Gus. In a world where everything's digital, he picked up a pen. Because some things are too important for a keyboard. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the city hum, turning Mitchell's words over in my mind. Every success I had started in your workshop. Had he really felt that way? All those years of thinking I'd lost him to a world I couldn't enter, and he'd been carrying me with him the whole time. Morning came cold and clear. Osgood Hall looked different in early light, almost gentle, like it understood the weight of what was about to happen inside its walls. Justice Hargreaves entered without fanfare. His face gave nothing away. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony in the matter of Brousseau versus Brousseau. The will of Mitchell Réjean Brousseau, dated March the 8th, 2025, was executed in full compliance with the Ontario Succession Law Reform Act. The testator demonstrated clear mental capacity, and no credible evidence of undue influence has been presented." Jolene's sharp breath cut through the room. The disappointed expectations of a surviving spouse do not constitute legal grounds for overturning a valid testamentary instrument. The will stands as written. His gavel fell, and the sound echoed through that old courtroom like the last note of something finished. In the corridor outside, Jolene caught my arm. Her composure was gone entirely, replaced by something raw and furious. "I'll appeal. I'll take this to the Court of Appeal. You haven't won." "Jolene," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. "Mitchell made his choice. He left you the condo. That's a good start for a new life. Maybe it's time to build one. He never would have done this without you poisoning him. Maybe he saw something clearly that both of us missed." She pulled away and walked toward the elevator, Whitfield trailing behind her with the look of a man already composing his final invoice. I watched them go and felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and something underneath it that might have been the beginning of peace. Gus drove me home. I couldn't face the highway alone. We took the 401 west to the 7, then north through Perth and Carleton Place. the landscape shifting from steel and glass back to rock and pine and river. Each kilometer peeled away a layer of Toronto until, somewhere past Almonte, I started to feel like myself again. Back in Arm Prior, I went straight to my workshop. Sawdust still covered the floor from the morning I'd left. The half-finished cabinet for Mrs. de Boll still sat on the bench, its joints waiting to be glued. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But I was different. On my workbench, next to a coffee can full of Robertson screws, sat the photo of 9-year-old Mitchell holding that Wally on lock day shuts. I picked it up and looked at it for a long time, seeing something I'd missed before. Not just a proud boy with his fish, but the foundation of a man who'd never forgotten where he came from. I set the photo back down and picked up a piece of cedar, running my thumb along the grain. $21 million was sitting in a trust account on Bay Street, and I had no idea what to do with it. But I knew what Mitchell would want. Something that lasted. Something built with care and purpose, the way I'd taught him. The next morning I called Raymond. "I want to set up a fund," I said. "Scholarships for kids from small towns, trades, university, whatever they need. I want it named after Mitchell and Colette." There was a pause on the line. "I think he'd be very proud of that, Mr. Brousseau." I hung up and looked out the kitchen window at the river. The water dark and steady the way it always was in late autumn, carrying leaves downstream toward somewhere I couldn't see. Mitchell's letter sat on the table beside me, the handwriting already becoming the most valuable thing I owned. "Thank you, son," I said to the empty kitchen, my voice thick. "I finally understand what you were telling me." Outside, the Ottawa Valley stretched under a sky so wide it made everything feel possible. The first snow of the season was just beginning to fall, light and quiet, covering the world in something clean and new. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.